So today I'm going to be talking to you about unleashing agility using the theory of constraint by focusing steps today. So I'm Alexander Hilton. I'm an Agile trainer and an Agile change agent over at National Grid. But prior to National Grid, and not that long ago, I was also a Scrum Master and release train engineer, just working out of the Burlington area. But I only got introduced to Agile not that long ago, maybe about 7 years ago at this point. My original roots actually came from small business consulting and working out of a different type of philosophy. And that philosophy was rooted based on the theory of constraints. Now, theory of constraints is an interesting little practice. It came out of manufacturing around in the mid 80s or so. We'll talk a little bit about the history on it, but what I really noticed was, and what brought me to Agile originally, was the alignment between the theory of constraints and Agile practices. You'll notice today a lot of the parallels, and for the most part, I don't even expect many of the folks who are very well seasoned in Agile to even sit back and say, hey, this is brand spanking new material. What I'm hoping, though, is that it gives you a new lens of understanding some of these practices, because the theory of constraints is a very simple approach you can take with pretty much any team. It's almost a universal approach to improving systems and improving overall throughput for anything from letting kids down a slide to figuring out how to radically improve your organizations. So without any further ado, have anyone ever seen this approach? So if you're working with a team, you have 6 stories currently in your backlog, team's saying, hey, we're feeling pretty confident on it, but we're a little bit new to this entire Agile thing and Agile ways of working. We're pretty confident that this approach can work. We have a good number of developers, enough QE. We think we can get through this practice. Well, let's start seeing how their sprint starts playing out. All right, we're getting some things done. So the sprint looks like it's going well. Work's getting done. Oh, something got hung up. Not so good. Oh, we're coming near the end of the sprint, and all of a sudden, oh boy. This situation relate to anyone here? Yeah, fairly common one. Why might this have happened? Can anyone just quickly tell me, just spit some words out that might be coming to mind here?
Not enough testers.
Not enough testers. What else? Yeah, so not enough testers. We're hearing that there's something that's clogging us up, but inevitably not everything's getting done, which means someone's going to be a little irritated at the end of the day. The team said they could get 6 items done and they only got 2 done. So what we're going to be talking about, and what you guys are hopefully going to be learning today, some of the value that theory of constraints can bring. This includes practices such as improving your overall workflows, understanding the theory of constraints, what it is, and the 5 focusing steps. These are very simple steps that can help figure out where these problems are occurring and how to best remediate them. Applying theory of constraints within an Agile context. Again, the big thing is I'm hoping you guys see some of the synergies today between TOC and Agile and how they work really well together in a very natural way. Navigating constraints, understanding what a constraint actually is, understanding how to identify it, and when you do identify it, how to manage it and best optimize and then potentially solve that constraint. Really helped bring this concept to light. Goldratt was a physicist. He saw that there was a difference in how American manufacturing was being done versus the Japanese markets, and wanted to figure out how to most simply solve the problems that American manufacturing was facing. And he came up with this very simple approach on just how do we actually optimize and solve these problems? And that really came out with the theory of constraints. And as I mentioned, it was originally focused on manufacturing, specifically looking at some of the differences between the Japanese manufacturing approaches, things like the Toyota production system, things that came out of post-war Japanese manufacturing. They had to radically change their ways of working because they didn't have these well-developed infrastructures, these well-developed industrial systems that the United States had to find ways to compete. Their infrastructure was obviously war-torn. It was devastated. So they had to come up with methods on how to maximize their efficiency and potentially lean out their systems. And through that, they ended up outperforming the United States. And that's where Goldratt said, and actually a number of other folks said, hey, we have to find different ways of bringing about this. So this is where the lean concepts came from and where theory of constraints ended up coming from. Theory of constraints, along with lean, were very influential as they came over to the United States and radically changed a lot of manufacturing organizations. It started to ebb into software development, and a number of the early practitioners noticed, hey, this stuff could actually apply universally. It doesn't just apply in a manufacturing context. So you'll notice a lot of these parallels pretty early on because it actually was influential to a lot of the early adopters of Agile. So much so that in 2008, when DevOps came out of Agile itself, TOC ended up being very, very directly impactful with DevOps. So the Phoenix Project, if anyone's familiar with that book from Gene Kim, probably one of the more popular DevOps books in the market. Gene Kim's very blunt with his idea that basically he copied the goal in a lot of ways. He actually mentions it in his book, Beyond the Phoenix Project, which he directly paid homage to Beyond the Goal, which was written about a decade prior to it, because he actually really based his 3 ways in his approach on influencing DevOps within the based on the theory of constraints. So much so that even the entire construct of the book in terms of how it was written was intended to follow the goal. So TOC has really been back following Agile for a very long time and really influencing it, but sometimes doesn't always get the attention it deserves. So I'm hoping folks today can start seeing how these practices relate. But enough of the history. I've been talking about that for quite a while now. What actually is the theory of constraints? Well, theory of constraints is based on a very simple premise. What's the goal of an organization? Can anyone tell me? Just what's the goal of our organizations?
Make money.
Pretty much. Very good.
Jail, stay out of jail.
Make money without going to jail. Yes. So ultimately, most private organizations have one simple goal. It is to make money, but let's refine that to something a little more practical. The goal of any organization is to increase net profit while simultaneously increasing return on investment and increasing cash flow. It's a lot of words there for basically 3 key financial indicators that are saying, 1, are you growing? 2, are you improving your efficiency? And 3, do you actually have cash to be able to grow your business consistently? So that's the throughput we're really going to start talking about today. And that was what GoalRat started to discuss, was this idea of throughput. We have to maximize throughput and the rate the system can actually generate money and through sales and meet its financial goals. Our goal is to maximize throughput. Now notice, this isn't throughput in the sense of how many widgets did we create. It's not how many stories we got done. It's not our velocity. It's how much money has been achieved, how much value has been created. And that's where theory of constraints really does start to shine. And it focuses specifically on this aspect. And we'll see for good reason why that is. But ultimately, it's all about that, delivering the maximum amount of value that you can get delivered at any point in time. Now, we haven't talked yet about the constraint, but that part comes in pretty quickly. Because when we start thinking about throughput, let's just imagine and just admire my amazing art here. If we have a pipe and water going through that pipe, that's basically the same type of concept as throughput through a system. You know, we want to make sure that when we know that there's some sort of opportunity to make money, that we can get it out the other side in the most efficient way possible. Now, let's say we start pumping some water through that pipe. Well, the pipe seems like it can handle quite a lot, but we're only getting so much on the other side of it. That's the idea of where theory of constraints starts coming into play. So why exactly is only so much coming out the other side? Well, what if we start increasing the pipe limits? Do we think we're going to get more throughput if we increase the pipe width?
Then where?
Exactly. If we start, so I'm going to increase this pipe width. Ooh, I didn't do anything. I just spent a lot of money hiring a plumber to increase the width of this pipe and nothing happened. And that's because I increased the width in the wrong spot. I had to increase it there where the constraint is. The throughput is governed by the constraint. And that's all the theory of constraint is about. So with that in mind, theory of constraint really is just a management paradigm that says any system is governed by a handful of constraints, really just one within any value stream. And with that in mind, the throughput of an organization can only be limited by this constraint. Now, this constraint could be internal, so it might be your production systems, how many machines you have working at a given point in time, but it could also be in the market. It could be something outside, so market forces, customer demand, those sorts of things. So the constraint isn't just within your own teams, within your own organizations. It can potentially extend outside of them, and understanding where they are is a key factor in maximizing that throughput and solving these constraints. Again, if you're not solving the right constraint, you may be putting in a lot of effort for no good reason. So understanding this interrelationship is key, and that's where the 5 focusing steps start to come into play. So going back to our problem. So we have this team working along, they have this problem. What do we do about it? Well, let's start applying the 5 focusing steps. And that's actually very similar to a number of teams I worked with. Again, I'm thinking a number of folks in this room have probably seen something similar. So we're going to follow these 5 focusing steps in this example. And then later we're going to do a quick work exercise ourselves to practice this in motion. But the idea here, just at high level, we first identify the constraint, exploit the constraint, subordinate everything to the constraint, elevate the constraint, and repeat. It's a very simple process. But once you start doing it, you're going to see tremendous value. And let me walk through some of this with just one team that was very similar to one I was working with. So starting with our first step, identify the constraint. Identifying bottlenecks that hamper our abilities to achieve our goals. This is a very simple step. This is where we're observing, we're going out to our factory floors, taking a look to see where inventory is piling up. Maybe we have a machine that has just a ton of inventory in the back that's not getting out and not getting sold to customers. Maybe it's our dev teams. Maybe we're sitting there and we're seeing a backlog behind our QE teams, maybe our ops teams, code waiting to go to production. We're observing and taking a look to see where in the system this stuff is piling up. It's a very simple concept. And it's built into a lot of our agile practices. So think about your Kanban boards, think about your big visual indicators, your backlogs, and your overall performance. These are ways of visualizing work that help us start to identify where the constraints are. If you can't identify where the constraint is, it's very hard to start to solve the overall problem for the system. So I heard it earlier, where's our constraint within the system? Testing. Exactly. So testing is where the constraint is. So congratulations, you've done the first step. We've identified where at least the constraint within this particular system is. We're going to assume for the moment it's not outside the system. So very good job. But that's where we will start to focus our effort. Our next step is to exploit the constraint. So exploiting the constraint means we're trying to maximize the value of the throughput through the identified constraint without major investment. So this would be like if we have, say, again, our quality assurance team, let's say we have only 40 hours of work we can get out of them per week. Well, what if they're ending up spending all their time having to answer random emails or having to do all this random stuff, maybe minor tasks? Well, that's not great for their throughput because they're focused on low value effort that's just tying up a lot of their time and preventing us from maximizing the utilization of those individuals. On a machine on the factory floor, for instance, if you have something, say like a heater that's meant, or a heat treat for some metal, for instance, and everything in the factory has to go through that. Well, if your workers are taking a lunch break and that machine suddenly turned off, well, if this is your main constraint, you have an idle resource here that needs to be used to maximize constraints. So you are going to look at opportunities on how can we try to perhaps rotate our schedules and make sure that that machine's always on and always achieving throughput. The idea is that we want to do as minimum work as possible to start maximizing the throughput on the constraint. And we're just going to do very simple steps on doing this. No different than what we're doing within our Scrum practices, where we maybe order our backlogs, make sure that we're focused on these top value items. And if we go back to our team for a moment, so we're taking a look at the current throughput of this team. We're seeing 2 items are done. We know where our constraint is. Let's take a look at what value is being delivered to see if we have an understanding of what exactly got done. Oh, no, that's not good. Did our throughput go up or down, do you guys think, based on what we had previously? Yeah. So now that we know that the highest value items were stuck, we now know that our throughput's actually down because we're delivering lower value items. So it's even worse than we first thought. That's not good. But now pretend for a minute that we're living in a perfect world. These are all the same size items and they're going to move through the system. We're just going to do some quick magic here. We can get 2 items done. Now we change some of our decision making and say, all right, the only thing that testing is going to work on this sprint are these top high value items. And we're going to focus on the needs for the testing teams in this case, because we know they're our constraint. Let's make sure those high value items are done. The product owner can say, let's pause what we're doing. We're not going to work on these mid-value items. We're not going to work on these low-value items. Just quick question, if development were to work on these items, do we think that they would get done? No, not currently. So we're creating up a queue behind, ready for testing. So we don't, that could impact our system later on. So we might not even start dev work. And that's when we're going to start moving into the next phase here, which is exploiting the constraint. But that's our first step, is just making sure we're moving along and getting this high value work through the system. Subordinate everything to the constraint. So this is where we start making some radical changes in the ways we're working. So subordinating everything to the constraint, we're now adjusting all our non-constraints to support the throughput of the constraint. As I mentioned previously, we're not even going to start those other items because if they're not going to get done, we're creating a queue behind the QE team that could cause problems. So instead, we're going to pause and make some decisions on what we can do differently. And I've worked with plenty of dev teams where they've been in a position where they're saying, well, wait a minute, Alex, what are you saying? I have to be idle. I can't work. Well, your work's not going to get through the system. You're waiting. You have to get through testing or this is never going to production. Well, what do I do instead? Well, let's start thinking about that. Maybe we change some of our workflows, some of our priorities, some of our focus. Maybe we start sitting down, work on some items that maybe don't need QE. Maybe instead you partner with QE, start working with them. It really is a way of just starting to create a cohesive and focused way of maximizing your overall throughput, because you really are starting to have those conversations and saying, hey, we don't want you just working on stuff, being busy and just generating this queue of stuff that's going to get bogged down and potentially never get done. Let's instead try to figure out how we can improve our throughput through the constraint. And these conversations, and I've had these a lot of times actually, almost always from my perspective, come up in retrospectives, but you can basically have them anywhere possible. We're just really taking a look at our system and making sure that what we're essentially getting done is, and our plans are actually based on reality and not based on just everyone trying to be busy, trying to get work done, and just, we want to make sure that we're improving the overall throughput. So with this particular example here, go ahead, Maggie.
I'm just gonna shout it. One person online said, stop starting and start finishing.
It's a very good quote that does help with this one. So if we go back to subordinating everything to the constraint, what are some potential practices we might be able to do here that can help this team out? What are some just quick thoughts?
Well, you mentioned the breakdown the silo.
Breakdown silo. Very good. Yeah. So we might start having things like, I've had devs pair up with QE, and that can sometimes allow for a new understanding, and they can start to evolve their practices. In one particular case, I was working with a team that ended up accidentally doing this type of approach where they started doing test-driven development. Because at the end of the day, even though they didn't fully take off the need for QE to actually be involved, they did reduce the amount of unit tests that were needed, and they actually shaped their approach. Because at the end of the day, I can just keep doing busy work and just build, like writing code, writing all this code. But if it's not getting done, I'm not contributing any value. And it was very easy to have that conversation with their manager. At the end of the day, yeah, no, we recognize that this stuff's not getting done. So instead, let's take a look at the approach. What can we do instead? Maybe we have that idea of writing unit tests. Maybe we start, if we have ops as issues, maybe we start working with the ops team, start that cross training, start taking advantage of the folks in your system and saying, hey, what can we do differently? Because if we know we're just going to be doing busy work, let's make sure we're actually doing work that's going to be productive to the overall constraint. And when you identify that constraint, it's much, much easier to figure out what to do differently and how to approach it. And in this case, we're just going to say, we're just going to give us a mid-value story getting done. So, yay, we're getting a little bit more done. How much investment have I made at this point? Very little. The dev team's already probably fully staffed. They're working at their normal pace. So we're not really changing our investment there. Our backlog, we're just sitting down with the product owner, just making sure we're identifying high value items. So realistically, we haven't done any investment here. It's a very simple change, but we're really radically changing the overall throughput of the system because we've identified high value work and because we've actually created plans and revamped and changed our systems in a way that actually accommodates the ability to get stuff done, not just being busy. But I still have other things that I'm done. This is where we elevate the constraint. Elevating the constraints, the idea that we're going to start increasing the capacity of the constraint through actual structural changes. This is where we're going to talk about things like investing in new tools. Maybe we're investing in equipment, maybe we're investing in training. We're changing overall structures of the system. If you potentially have issues where your staging environment might not match your production environment, maybe you're going to be talking about how to completely rehaul the entire system, for instance. This is where we start spending money. Now, the challenge here is that oftentimes folks want to jump to this step because it feels easy. It's just like, oh yeah, just add resources to the problem. But at the end of the day, as we go back to our pipe for a minute, if our pipe has so much water flowing through it at a time, and we want to deliver water to our customers, well, if there's a little bit of sewage in that piping, and you increase the width of that piping, do you think you've actually delivered more value to your customer? I don't think so. So the idea here is this is where we start doing our additional investment. This is where we start adding new people. This is where we start adding our tooling. Maybe we're starting to bring in CI/CD pipelines. This is where the investment takes place, but we want to make sure the previous steps are done because, again, if we want to keep delivering additional sewage to our customer, I'm sure they're going to be thrilled when they take the tap. A very simple agile approach here. I've seen this one within Scrum at scale, at least models where you essentially will have a team that gradually is growing. You know, they're trying to maximize their throughput. You're adding additional resources to it, and eventually the team gets to a certain size, and then it splits. So it reaches about 12 people, and then they split it into 2 separate teams, and they keep scaling it from there. But they're already following the previous practices that we discussed, where you might have something like your product owners make sure that your backlogs are fully prioritized. So you know you have the best value. You've subordinated the constraints. You have cross-training going on. So each team is very capable and can get rid of those bottlenecks. So we're just going to do the same here. Just split the team and add additional folks. Now we can get additional work done. And again, now we've invested. Now we've definitely committed. So we better hope that those low value items are worth the investment. Hopefully they are, but we're certainly getting a lot more throughput than we were previously. But then we're not done. And this is where we repeat. So we've changed our system. We've now added resources. It's not the same system as previously. So when you add resources, when you change these old rules, when you change these old habits, now you're in the position where you have to repeat. This is just like what we do within anything within our agile systems. We're constantly iterating, we're constantly evolving. You don't stop here. If you stop here, well, I'm going to tell you what, your competitor's not. They're going to find a way to keep growing, and they're going to make sure that your complacency, that you pay for it eventually. So we're always seeking the next constraint. And making sure that our new system is still evolving no matter where that is. And that could take us outside the system, or it could be something within our system that we just need to go after. But we're going to go right back to the identify step and rinse and repeat. So going back to our team, we're about to repeat the step. Where do we think the constraint might be now? I would say so.
Maybe a skills mismatch. Yeah.
Sorry, what was that?
There might be a skills mismatch because the high value stories are all being done by teams.
That or I just am very lazy with my PowerPoint design, and I'm the constraint. In this case, I would say it could be potentially past this. Maybe you have an ops team that this could, for all we know, represent, oh, we're dev complete and it's an ops team's fault, or maybe it's in your product owner's side. And there might be a market issue, and we have to be thinking about our market. From my perspective, I would just say the constraint might be coming from the market side. We're going to assume done means done here, and that these are all being accepted. And we've confirmed that the users love it and they are buying all our products. And now we have to talk to our product owner to see, hey, what more do we have to do to start attracting new customers, figure out their issues? Maybe we have to expand into different markets and change where this team's focused potentially. So just some benefits of applying it. So as you guys can see, improve productivity, decision-making, lead times, that's all fun and games. At the end of the day, one of the biggest things I've noticed is when you start having these conversations with teams, it can be very off-putting to start. You know, again, talk to a dev, like, hey, you're writing all this code, it's not getting done. Well, why are we still doing this? It's just essentially busy work that's not going to get, well, what do you mean? My manager's going to get pissed at me if he doesn't see that I'm not coding. But when you start having the conversation, you sit down with the managers, you sit down with whoever's involved, very quickly it can come to the table once you especially have a visual of the system and evidence that this stuff isn't getting done, that, hey, maybe we do need to pivot our conversations here and see what we can do differently. And the theory of constraints offers that, because it's not saying we get rid of those folks. It's saying, hey, what opportunities do we have to unlock the real value and overall throughput of the system? We had those 6 items that wanted to get done. So we know this stuff, there's a desire to get all this stuff done. So let's figure out how we can make it happen with the folks we have. And that can be very empowering to a lot of team members when they get that opportunity. Again, I've had folks who sit down and you have QEs working with devs, and all of a sudden they're like, and I remember this where basically the next day I had a dev who sat down with a QE, learned some of this test-driven development type stuff. And he came back and was like, I need to do that again. I've never seen QE work in that way before. And I never knew that's how they interacted with my code. Now I think I want to be partnering with them again, especially since they're still busy and we're not going to get this stuff done. I'm going to partner with them. So it can actually really help improve the conversations you're having with your teams. There are some common pitfalls, though, to just be cognizant of. So misunderstanding the concept of constraint. So big one, as I said, when your constraint evolves, so when you've elevated the constraint and now you're getting ready to repeat, you've changed the system. You have a new system you're dealing with. So there's a new constraint somewhere else in the system. If you start tackling multiple constraints at a time, you could just be causing chaos. You have no idea what you're evolving. And this is one of those things. If you hear someone saying, well, just solve all your bottlenecks, sorry, it's not going to happen. You're going to end up causing a very chaotic system and likely changing things so rapidly that you're causing some sort of change fatigue, change burnout. Don't do it one at a time, simple approach.
So you're saying everything can't be the #1 priority?
Let's go in. Do we want to go into the history of the word priority and how there's one and how it comes from the word prioritas? Yeah, no, not everything's priority. We do want to identify the one major constraint in our system. By the way, that constraint could be people related, that could be in our systems. So it is identifying this constraint and working on that first and then repeating the process once we've gone through the other 4 steps.
Does it matter which one you do? Let's say, because sometimes it's hard to figure out which, right?
So
Go.
Just, we don't mind repeating for that.
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you always do the most important one or the one that you can identify? Because I think sometimes it's hard to figure
Yes.
out which one is the most important constraint.
siloed approaches is kind of the key challenge that we're going to be alluding to here. It can be used locally. These techniques certainly can be used locally. I've used them with development teams in the past. Ideally, we want to be looking at the whole system as best we can, because the entire system is going to be determined by that one primary constraint. If you can get that visualization, great. Doesn't mean you can't apply it locally, but be aware when you're applying it locally. The problem is that, let's say, like, again, let's go back to that example. If all those stories are going over to an ops team and the ops team can't handle it, you haven't increased throughput at all. You've made zero improvement. So we want to make sure we're looking as far out into the system as we possibly can. Sometimes that's not always easy to do. Go ahead.
Here's a fun coaching tip from Richard Hunhausen. Sorry, I butchered that. Coaching tip: don't refer to a person as a constraint. A person. They are.
That's
or the problem.
Yeah. Some other ones, the big one I think I see all the time is this idea of elevating the constraint. So we know, team A has to get so much stuff done. Well, they're not going to be able to get it all done. They keep telling you we can't get all this stuff done. And someone says, well, I have access to, I can just toss some consultants at this, and we'll just, add some additional resources in a headcount. Well, again, what if you have low priority items in there and all of a sudden you just have, again, more sewage moving through your pipeline? Congratulations, you're delivering the customer the wrong thing. And you've just done so at tremendous cost. Or, and even if we look into more technical systems, think about just AWS and how easy they make it to add additional resources to your environments. Maybe it's better to refactor your code and make sure you're actually getting stuff done well, instead of just adding additional servers. Another thing to consider when it comes to the siloed approach is this idea of lack of systems thinking. We want to make sure we're looking as deep into the system as we possibly can. This could be the idea of if I'm selling a part, say to, I'm selling a gearbox to Toyota, for instance. That sale to Toyota specifically doesn't actually matter. It matters only when Toyota delivers that car to the actual end customer. That's how far into the system we might have to look. So even though I might have made the sale for myself, if Toyota stops making sales, guess what? I'm going out of business too. So we want to make sure that we're looking as far into the system as we possibly can and thinking as holistically as possible, or else we could end up in the trap of pushing things in the wrong direction. And sure, we might have increased our personal velocity, but we're still going to go out of business at the end of the day. And then the final one, insufficient training. Without a clear understanding of the TOC principles, we might fall short of its potential. Biggest one I would say here is just understanding what throughput actually means. Again, if I can produce 1 million widgets in a day, let's say, well, that's great and fantastic. If the one left on the shelf is worth, $10 million and the other ones were worth $1 million or $1, excuse me, wow, bad math there. Then obviously I haven't actually increased throughput. It certainly looks like we've produced a lot, but again, it's going down to the dollar value. We want to make sure we are going through these steps in the best possible way. All right, do we have any questions? Because we're about to jump into an activity for folks. Yes, go ahead and back if I can have you turn around for me. Oh, nope, sorry, we have a question in the back.
That word subordinate.
Subordinate.
That's a tricky word. Does it, if I said to you, does it mean to low cost improvise or to work in circles around the constraint? Am I understanding what subordinating the constraint means?
So not exactly. So subordinate the constraint would mean that all decisions are going to be made based on constraint. So just a very simple, maybe not a simple example, but are you familiar with like the idea of like weighted shortest job first or something along those lines? So the idea that I have a high value work item and I'm going to measure it versus the job size, for instance. Just it's a simple method. Okay, I'll try a different example. So let's take again, going back to trying to think of a good example here that might be able to simplify it. Let's go to Gal. So if we're going to be doing
Yep. Cost versus value.
Cost versus value, perfect. Thank you for that.
And what you're trying to do is you're trying to maximize the value for minimum cost.
Yes. So yeah, the idea of weighted short job first, I was actually trying to pivot from the example, but the basic premise is I have a value from an item, a potential value over the amount of time it's going to take. If I'm, and the idea is it's a very simple potential method of just getting a quick idea of what your priority is. Oftentimes teams will look at it and say, all right, we're going to look at the entire delivery teams and say what their total time to complete is. And then that's our evaluation. Now, if you have your development, your ops, your QEs in there, if you have everyone in there, you might be thinking the entire system, but if only one set of if only our QE team is determining it, your number could look very different. So again, you might be dividing by the wrong thing. But another example for like subordinating to the constraint would be, so if we have folks who are trying to work again, maybe on a heat treat for a factory, you have all these items that have to get through the overall system. What we might actually end up doing is like, for instance, we only have say, 8 people on the machine or something, so that, and they can only work 8 hours a day. Maybe we take some additional resources, some folks in the night shift, maybe create inventory for the teams for the morning or something. We maybe shift these and see if we can have them help out. So instead of saying, hey, just keep producing stuff, how can we have you help the constraint? It's essentially those types of practices. You're trying to take all the resources you currently have who are not in the constraint and have them help out and solve the constraint and make all decisions based on that premise.
How is that different from exploiting them?
So exploiting the constraints, maximizing the value flow through the constraint without going to the other steps first, if that makes sense. So just looking at the constraint, making sure you have the right value items going through. Yeah. We're going to practice an activity with it. Currently have handouts going around the room here. Everyone online will have a Zoom link in a moment, but we're going to walk through it. And hopefully everyone will start to see what these practices are.
I think one of the things about the theory of constraint though is that the constraint shifts, right? So you're constantly always looking at your constraints, like a
Yes.
never ending process.
That's the repeat.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. So at the end of the day, you can, well, you do solve it, there's only a certain amount of money in the world. Which ultimately might be your constraint. So we're gonna do a quick example here from Annie's Bakery. We're gonna be looking at a small business and trying to figure out how we can help solve their problem. And we're gonna practice this. Hopefully you guys can see the solution at the end. But let me walk you guys through the scenario. Thank you. Annie's Bakery is known for its freshly baked baguettes, $1 each. Almond croissants at $3 each. Decadent chocolates at $5 each. And the bakers are going to come every morning to prep the day's sales. Prep starts at 2 a.m. And everything sold that day must be ready by 8 a.m. Again, we want freshly baked goods. So each item has to go through the following phases. Mix the dough. So you mix items at 12 items per hour. Shape and prep. So we're going to prep at 10 items per hour for the baguettes. But the almond croissants and our chocolate cakes are going to take a little bit longer at about 6 items per hour. Baking, we can do that at 6 items per hour. Cooling, after baking the items, the bakery has enough cooling rack space for 12 items per hour. And then after that, we're going to have some finishing touches for the almond croissants only and the chocolate cakes. And the bakery staff can finish up to 10 of these items per hour. Now let's take a quick look through the system. So we're dealing with a small business here. They're just starting out, new bakers, and they're also very tired. I don't know if you ever started at 2 a.m., but no, thank you. So they're just going to start with something simple here. They have baguettes that they're going to start with. So they're just starting with these red baguettes. Again, callers here for those. Please let me know if you're having a hard time seeing that, but we're starting with our baguettes. So we move on to 3 a.m. They're mixing them, getting ready to mix them. Well, we can't shape more than 10 items at a time. So we're going to just move what we have over into shaping. And then we're going to start on something a little more complicated. Folks are waking up, it's easier to get started. So we're going to work on our almond croissants now. It's going to be in the 3 a.m. So 3 a.m. passes, move to 4. Oh no, we're back at our baking phase that can only handle 6 items per hour. Okay, so we're going to move some more stuff into inventory. And then we're baking our baguettes and our almond croissants are in shaping, and we're starting our chocolate cakes because folks are finally awake and can actually get it done. We start moving along, 5 a.m. comes. Again, we have to separate our items because, and notice by the way, we're having a bit of an inventory thing piling up here with our almond croissants finally baking and our baguettes are cooling off. Chocolate cakes are now shaped and they're getting ready to bake. And we're going to start some more chocolate cakes because again, we want to get those done. Well, we again have to split, but we have good news. Our first item has been delivered. So we've now achieved our first throughput here with $6. And it's only 6 a.m. So that means we're going to be in a good spot, right? All right, so moving along to 7 a.m. Well, we have to finish those almond croissants. We're getting close to the wire, but we're going to keep going. We're going to keep being busy, working along. Now, oh boy, we keep moving stuff through the system. All right, time's up, work's done. Hands off your stations. We have to sell. We made $24. Your guys' job is going to be to try to solve this team's issue. But where is the constraint? How do we exploit the constraint? What do we subordinate the constraint to? How might we elevate the constraint? And before repeating, what is the maximum throughput you could achieve? So we're going to spend, I'm just going to put 5 minutes on my clock here. And let everyone just practice this activity. For the folks in Zoom, Akarsh, can you share that link?
Yeah, I've already shared it.
All right, perfect. So if you have this link, you should have access to a form to start filling it out. Don't worry, I'm not getting anyone's names on this, so feel free to make as many mistakes as you like. We're just going to spend 5 minutes thinking this scenario through. If you want, feel free to partner up with your neighbors if you're here, but just go through these questions and just see what you can achieve here before we start talking it through. All right, I'm going to give you all 5 minutes.
Look for more value.
Let's just say I haven't put a dollar figure on it, but it's involved, so good call out. I'm gonna ask that everyone focus on front, and I'm gonna ask for a volunteer, if you don't mind, someone who would be willing to share your thoughts, what you've seen. Please go ahead.
Well, obviously, the constraint is the oven. And the point is to get things to the oven as quickly as possible.
Mhm.
So I would start off with 6 baguettes and 6 chocolate cakes.
6 baguettes and 6 chocolate cakes starting in the morning.
Starting in the morning, first thing I start. That means that for the baguettes go directly to the oven.
Yep.
And chocolate cakes go into the prep.
Mhm.
And then at that point, as far as I can figure out, doing best by just doing chocolate cakes. Because it's the most valuable.
Got it. So your goal is try to get the baguettes in first, starting in the morning.
Well, use the oven as much as possible.
Yep.
And the only things I get into the oven after the second hour.
Perfect. So you have exploit the constraint, make sure everything's going through the oven as best as possible, and your focus is on trying to get as many chocolate cakes through as possible. Okay, awesome. Do we have any other thoughts?
Yeah, another oven.
So for subordinate the constraint, could we revamp our recipe for chocolate cakes to be a no-bake chocolate cake?
So it's a very fair answer. And this is, I'm be curious why, how you could go about that, but potentially, yes, that might be one option you might actually make in the real world. In this scenario, we're gonna say you have to bake those cakes. What are some other thoughts?
Well, you mentioned sleep deprivation as an issue here.
Hmm.
So for, I guess, elevating the constraint, we might need to purchase a coffee maker. So that they can work on chocolate cakes first thing in the morning and not be sleeping much.
Yeah, well, might be an option too.
Or they could put coffee in the cake too. So they can do both. They can up the profitability by selling a higher quality item at the same time.
Well, one thing I did make into the assumption here is that we were perfect market, no matter what, they're just buying chocolate cakes, so. If only consumers were so generous. Go
Would
ahead.
you kindly double click on how, or one example of how you would subordinate the constraint in this case?
Sure.
I'm not sure I understood.
I'm gonna run through the answer on this one in a moment, or at least one I came up with. Let me check our time. Okay. I would be curious though, has anyone actually, let's see, what's the maximum throughput we've got? Has anyone gotten, what are some numbers that we've seen?
I came up 6 items.
6 items?
6 items.
6 items.
So if the question were during the window you gave us, I came up with 30.
$30?
No, it's the maximum number of units that can go through.
Okay.
Because we only have 5 hours and it's 6
Yeah.
units per hour in the oven. So given the time constraints you gave us,
Mhm.
the one question I had about this exercise, you said that the bakery needs to bake fresh every day. You didn't mention whether or not we could do prep work the night before. So is it the baking part that's the magic part, or do all 5 steps have to happen starting at 3 a.m.?
I like your way of thinking. So now you're starting to get into the idea of how do we actually exploit the constraint, make sure that oven is all as pretty much as always on as we possibly can get to. So you're starting to tap into where the solution is when it comes to exploiting the constraint. When it comes to subordinating everything to the constraint, that's going to be all of their decisions are going to be made based on the constraint itself and what can get done. I'm going to show you in a moment what that's going to look like. And it taps into what answer you were just dancing around. And I'll show you it within the same time window. So we don't actually have to have people working additional hours. Any other thoughts before I share the answer that I came up with? By the way, 30 items were done, you said, what were those? Chocolate cakes, so.
Yeah, I was just doing high level,
Yeah.
the oven, I
The
wasn't
150,
down
yeah.
to particular.
Yep.
That's what I do too.
Yeah, so 150 was the best.
5, 8 a.m., 1:51 at 1:50. One person online said, leave the oven on, oven's always on. It's a high and low.
All right, let's jump into the solution here. So here is the solution I came up with, 1:59 a.m. Now, I'm not doing anything funny here. I have some inventory ready, if you notice. Inventory is not always a bad thing, doesn't always go to waste. The only thing that we care about says freshly baked cakes has to be ready for the morning. Doesn't mean I can't do prep work, but I'm going to do it in the same time box window. I'm not changing our time boxes. I don't want my staff overworked and burning out, else I'll have a lot of other problems in my hand. So we get into 2 a.m. we start. All right, immediately, I've already doubled my oven size, so I've paid for the additional oven because I've already elevated the constraint. But I can still only work on 6 shape and prep at a time. So that's one issue that we're still going to have to solve, but I have 12 cakes already in the oven. Shape and prep, chocolate cakes, we're only working on chocolate cakes. Keep moving forward. Again, chocolate cakes, go into cooling and getting ready. We keep moving along. I have to separate some items here just because I have some stuff that needs the finishing. As you can see, though, the chocolate cakes are moving along. Now I'm going to introduce a little bit of a wild card here. We're introducing some baguettes. Again, my goal is to maximize my throughput for the day primarily. So our first delivery at 5 a.m., $50 on the table, 10 items. We have 8 now unfinished. Our baguettes are moving through. I start chocolate cakes again. Can anyone tell me why I start chocolate cakes again?
For tomorrow night, or tomorrow.
Bingo. So for tomorrow, I've chosen and explicitly, and by the way, notice I've also chosen not to bring in additional inventory as best I can right now, because again, I can only push through so much through the system. So I'm going to end up moving these guys down. Now I already have $90 through. Now what I'm going to do is now make the decision, the explicit decision at 7 a.m. to start moving these shape and prep things down into inventory for holding. So I'm prepping for the next day. Baguettes are cooling, they're going to be ready. So by 8 a.m. I have a whopping $160 of throughput because I went through these particular steps. As you can see, when it came to the decisions, a lot of it was prepping and getting ready for the day before. I took full advantage of the fact that I had to increase this baking step because again, we have a goal of freshly baked cakes or well, freshly baked goods at least to try to get done. And with our shape and prep step, that's going to be our next step to work on because I can only work on 6 of these high value items, even though I can move a lot more baguettes. Problem is they're worth only $1 a piece.
But I'm a very unhappy customer because I wanted
That's very fair. The way the system's designed, we're assuming a very perfect market and very willing customers to eat chocolate cakes. So the constraint's not in the market for us, at least. All right. It's a little bit of an interesting activity. I hope folks found that as an interesting one. How are we feeling right now?
hungry.
Alice, can you just touch on which was the exploiting the constraints, subordinating? And
Yep. So the first part when we were exploiting the constraint itself was the determination for chocolate cakes explicitly, and then eventually baguettes as well. So the goal was I can only move 6 items through the system for the baking phase. In order to exploit that, the decision to take baguettes up early, no. Start with your chocolate cakes, they're going to get done. I need to maximize throughput through that constraint. That's the exploit phase. The subordinating phase, taking out that additional inventory, getting ready to prep the day before, saying explicitly, we're going to focus on building this inventory. That's where we started exploiting the constraint. We elevated the constraint. What do we have to do now? We can maximize this throughput. I can actually have 2 pieces of cake ready to go. Now we double the oven size. Then we repeat and move to shape. And next thing I know, I'm probably going to have to be talking to my customers about why we're not making almond croissants.
I'm sorry, which one was subordinate?
So subordinate was just after that's prepping the inventory. Yeah. to get ready, so the morning phase, everything, all activities would make sure the maximum throughput for when we actually have to deliver that value. The decision's made for that point. All right. Does anyone have any thoughts? We are about to come to time there. 3 minutes or so for Q&A.
We have a side thought that, the Toyota production system in the lean world, inventory is considered waste.
Correct, but not always, because yeah. So the idea is that inventory can be considered waste, especially when it's accumulating and not actually dealing with the flow of value. Technically here, it's probably not a great thing to do once you start elevating these constraints and you're maximizing the flow through the system. These can become a problem. I mean, these things can go stale. They have holding costs. They're not great. At the end of the day, if this inventory, let's say we lose, $6 of value for, like, we have to hold these chocolate cakes somewhere and it costs $6 of value. No, I'm not holding inventory then. In this particular case though, because the thing that matters is getting them baked the next day and the shaping and prepping I can do, it's fine here.
As long as you can filter through.
Yeah. I'm someone who definitely says, like, you don't want old lines of code hanging out there. You don't want to pile up inventory and stuff like that. But if you can get it done, if you know you can get that delivery, you can get that value, having just enough inventory is good. It can be very good for business. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the answer to question 6? It says, where do we look to repeat, mark only one oval, mixed shape, bake, core, finish?
Yes, so once we've changed the system, so now we have a different system than we first started. Do you agree with that? Where would our new the new system's constraint be? Shaping.
Okay, 6 per hour.
6 per hour for specifically our highest value item. So I can move 10 baguettes through, 10 baguettes, $10, but I can move only 6. Even though I have 6 chocolate cakes to move through, they're already worth $30. The more I can move through there, the higher my overall throughput. So your constraint has now shifted in the new system to that particular phase. If I could shift 12 items, 12 chocolate cakes now instead, not even 12, because what was my mix phase? I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but if I could move 12 at a time, I would almost double my overall ability to get stuff done. So we're going to start with that phase again, do the same step, and we're going to come to a different conclusion.
You snuck in a price increase too. There's 6 1/4. Not much you.
Thank you. That's a good answer.
Chris said, just make the croissants, $3.50 or $4.
That's actually another idea too, is that if you do need to increase the flow of value, right now they're following the exact same process. So obviously the chocolate cake's going to win, but real markets, you're going to have, clients who want these almond croissants. But if you're getting still a high demand for chocolate cakes, you might want to tap out that market first and then start moving back to almond croissants and potentially increasing the value or the dollar figure accordingly. Yep.
So if we have some inventory available at 2 a.m., why aren't we putting something in the oven then? Why do we wait till 3?
So can you repeat that question? I only heard you. We had some commotion in the room. Please go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. Why wouldn't you start baking at 2 a.m. rather than 3 if you've got some shaped and prepped inventory available at 1:59?
Maybe I scrolled past it a little fast. Here's where we are at 2 a.m. As you can see, it's already in the oven.
Oh, okay. I'm looking at the static slides online. It didn't show that way. Okay. Thanks.
One more question.
Are there any software tools that help you optimize the system? I mean, we're doing this in our heads. Is there a Monte Carlo simulation or any other kinds of tools that can be used?
Yeah, there's a number of tools out there, but overall going and seeing where your constraint is certainly probably the easiest one, and again, it's sometimes just going out and taking a look. At the end of the day, any ERP system you're dealing with, Jira, if it's only as good as the quality of the data, excuse me, so if you want to make sure you're going and seeing as best you can, you're going to hear this stuff. If you have a single point of failure, or an individual, for instance, who I just have all this work behind me, I have to get it all done. I'm the most important person in the organization. No tools can help you find that. Sometimes it's best to go and see yourself, then start diagramming out the system. A lot of these practices, certainly you can find mathematical models out there for, but overall start with just going and seeing and having the conversation, in my opinion.
So if all of the songs are only $3, why wouldn't if I outsourced it, would that be an elevated solution?
Yes.
It would,
Yes.
okay.
Last question, and then I'm gonna have to move along. Yeah, or a time box.
It seems like you could, like a packaged foodscape, batch size. Leave the price the same. Just make the stuff a little bit smaller, and you can walk more things through in each other.
Is that like Toblerone cutting down the size of their bars, like they have down these little narrow ones?
Look at cereal boxes, they're a couple ounces smaller than used to be, you know, yeah.
They're not out of business, but I'm sure their customers still make memes on that, so. Yes, that is, they could. All right, awesome. Well, thank you guys all for being a wonderful audience tonight. I have one last thing. For those who are here in the crowd, if you are interested, I am looking forward to some feedback, but it comes at a little bit of a cost and a little bit of a reward. I'm working on my LEGO Serious Play certification. I would like 5 folks to be willing to come with me to Not Your Average Joe's at the end of this. And if you're willing to be on camera and practice just a quick little retrospective, you're essentially just going to build a little Lego tower, give me some feedback, do some narration around it. You guys can get a round of drinks on me, and well, with a couple of appetizers. So just asking for 5 folks, probably 1 person who can be a camera, and others are welcome to join it, Not Your Average Joe's, and observe if you want. But I am going to ask that 5 folks do participate. So thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it, and thank you once. Thank you.